Under the solemn breath of the 20th century's dawn, when the world had scarcely healed from its wounds, and the air still carried the scent of fire and fear, there emerged a lineage, noble not by birthright alone, but by a restless ambition to define what it meant to serve. From this lineage came John Fitzgerald Kennedy, a name that would one day echo through marble halls and whispered prayers alike. He was born not merely into comfort, but into expectation, a house where power was spoken of as duty, and privilege was shadowed by responsibility. In the brick homes of Massachusetts, the Kennedy clan learned early that life's measure was not wealth, but contribution. Joseph Kennedy, stern and unrelenting, drilled into his sons a creed that men of intellect must also be men of consequence. The young John absorbed this, though with a quieter soul, more philosopher than merchant, more reader than ruler. He devoured books on history, on war, on the rise and fall of empires, and though frail in body, he was fierce in mind. Yet history, as it so often does, tempers greatness through suffering. Illness shadowed his youth, pain became his tutor. While others raced across Harvard Yard, Kennedy learned endurance from hospital beds. But he would not yield. Pain forged his discipline. Fragility sharpened his compassion. In every fevered night, he felt a kinship with the world's broken. Those unseen multitudes history leaves behind. And that empathy, so rare among politicians, would one day make him not merely a leader of men, but a student of humanity. Then came the war, that crucible of character. The world, engulfed once more in madness, summoned its youth to serve. Kennedy answered. In the restless Pacific, he commanded a patrol torpedo boat, a fragile craft of wood and courage. When his vessel was torn apart by enemy fire, he did not falter. He swam for hours through black water, dragging a wounded comrade by his life jacket strap clenched in his teeth. It was there, beneath a silent sky, that the boy of books became a man of endurance. That night carved into his soul the belief that survival demands sacrifice, and that leadership is proven not in victory, but in the willingness to bear pain for others. When he returned home, America itself stood at a crossroads. The old order had crumbled, and a new world demanded architects. The young soldier saw a republic uncertain of its future, prosperous yet anxious, powerful yet morally adrift. He saw that the real war was no longer fought with bullets, but with ideas. And so he entered politics, not for ambition alone, but for meaning. In those early campaigns, the name Kennedy became a whisper of something different. Youth amidst age, intellect amidst rhetoric. He spoke not of enemies, but of horizons. He promised not comfort, but challenge. He dared to ask a weary people to believe once more that the future could be beautiful. History often grants its prophets a moment of convergence, where personal destiny and collective need collide. For Kennedy, that moment came in the 1960s, when the world teetered between glory and annihilation. He stood as the bridge between the old and the new, between the post-war world of fear and the dawning age of hope. And yet, beneath his charm and elegance lays something deeper, a philosopher's restlessness. He questioned America's purpose. He asked, in the privacy of his own thought, whether power without virtue was any different from tyranny. He believed democracy was not a resting place, but a pilgrimage, a ceaseless journey toward justice. When he spoke, his words did not merely persuade, they awakened. Ask not what your country can do for you. He would one day declare, ask what you can do for your country. But that immortal line was born not of speechwriters, but of conviction, the culmination of every pain, every doubt, every hour spent staring into the abyss of his own mortality. For he knew, as all great leaders know, that history is not written by comfort. It is written by those who risk the ridicule of their age to honor the promise of their conscience. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, son of privilege, child of pain, scholar of humanity, would soon stand before a nation uncertain of its own soul. The young senator with the poet's eyes and soldier's heart was about to confront not just politics, but philosophy, not just enemies abroad, but divisions within. And as the storm clouds gathered, both literal and moral, he whispered to his inner circle a truth that would define his presidency. Where are the watchmen on the walls of world freedom? But we are also its students. This was not ambition. It was revelation. The stage was set, a world trembling before the nuclear age, and a leader ready to remind mankind that courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. The year was 1961. A cold wind prowled across the continents, carrying with it the twin specters of hope and ruin. In Washington, a man barely past his youth stood before the Republic and lifted his hand to the oath. Beneath the clear January sky, his breath mingled with the frozen air as though the spirit of a new generation had exhaled into history itself. He spoke, and the world listened. The torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans. It was not merely inauguration, it was annunciation, a call to imagine power not as dominion, but as stewardship. Kennedy's words rang like cathedral bells over a planet divided by ideology. East and West glared across barbed wire and bomb silos, yet in that voice there was something that transcended doctrine. The belief that mankind might yet rise above its machinery. The new frontier, he proclaimed, was not a line upon a map, but a threshold of the mind. It beckoned the scientist to search the stars, the citizen to conquer injustice, and the nation to rediscover its conscience. He demanded of his people not ease, but greatness. What choose to go to the moon? He said later, not because it was simple, but precisely because it was hard. To him, difficulty was the crucible of dignity. Yet the same century that offered the heavens also threatened the abyss. From Berlin to Havana, the planet trembled on a razor's edge. The Cuban Missile Crisis became the most perilous week in human chronology. Two empires stared into nuclear midnight, And in that glare, every statesman of lesser nerve would have faltered. But Kennedy, with a soldier's calm and a philosopher's patience, chose reason over rage. He listened when others shouted. He paused when generals demanded thunder. And in that pause, humanity was spared. He knew that courage untempered by wisdom becomes barbarism, and intellect without mercy becomes tyranny. His genius lay in balance, the harmony of moral restraint with decisive will. History remembers the missiles withdrawn, the ships turned home, but forgets the inner torment of a man who bore the weight of extinction upon his conscience. He slept little, prayed often, and when the world stepped back from annihilation, he wrote quietly in his notes, "Peace is a daily, a weekly, a monthly process." But peace was not the absence of struggle. It was a labor of spirit. Within his own land, another battle raged, one older than the Republic itself. The civil rights movement pressed against the gates of complacent power. Kennedy, son of privilege, found himself confronted by the unfinished revolution of equality. For months he hesitated, measuring law against politics, progress against re-election. Yet conscience is a relentless companion. The same empathy born in childhood illness and wartime agony now demanded action. In 1963, he addressed the nation. We are confronted primarily with a moral issue, as old as the scriptures and as clear as the American Constitution. With those words, he broke the silence of centuries. The struggle for black liberty was no longer regional, it was national, human, universal. Though fate would deny him the chance to sign the Civil Rights Act, the moral architecture was his. Meanwhile, his gaze lifted once more to the heavens. The space race was not for him a contest of rockets, but a parable of potential. To leave the earth was to prove that mankind could transcend its boundaries, political, cultural, spiritual. He saw the cosmos not as an escape from our divisions, but as their cure. We all breathe the same air, he reminded the world. We all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal. It was a sentence that belonged not to a politician, but to civilization itself. Through all this, he bore the unseen adversary that stalks every visionary, the brevity of time. Chronic pain gnawed at his spine, the secret ailment of a man who smiled through agony. Yet he refused pity. He concealed his suffering behind that easy wit, that quicksilver grace. For he believed that leadership demands theater, and that courage must be performed lest fear infect the multitude. By autumn 1963, America seemed poised upon a summit. Prosperity swelled, youth believed again, and the president spoke of DA-10T, of a world where the strong are just and the weak secure. He planned a journey to Texas, a gesture of reconciliation within his own divided house. None could know that destiny, ever the jealous twin of greatness, had already written the epilogue. And so, the motorcade moved through the noonlight of Dallas, that clear, deceitful light in which all seems calm before the fall. Crowds lined the streets, waving, smiling, hopeful, as though greeting the very embodiment of youth itself. The president sat beside his wife, radiant in pink, her poise masking the fatigue of endless journeys. Around them fluttered flags and faith, two fragile things that have always adorned the moment before tragedy. Then, in an instant measured not in seconds, but in silence, history bent. The echo of that rifle cracked not merely through Dealey Plaza, but through the conscience of the century. One moment, laughter. The next, the end of an age. The shock swept across oceans. In London, bells tolled. In Paris, strangers wept. In villages and cities alike, people stood motionless before radios. The world had lost not just a man, but an idea. The notion that idealism could still govern power, that poetry could yet shape politics. Jacqueline Kennedy stood firm, beside her husband's still form, unwilling to allow the public spectacle of despair. Dignity became her armor. She understood, as he had, that symbols endure where flesh cannot. And so she lit the eternal flame at Arlington, a modest fire in the wind, yet one that declared to the ages that light, though extinguished in body, survives in meaning. The years that followed would measure that meaning. Cynicism returned as swiftly as grief had spread. The world learned again the old lesson that martyrs are easier to admire than to imitate. Yet beneath the noise of politics, the deeper resonance endured. Kennedy had redefined the role of a statesman. No longer a custodian of order, but a sculptor of vision. He taught that leadership, when bound to imagination, can transcend the arithmetic of governance. That courage is not born of certainty, but of conviction. And that a nation's greatness lies not in its might, but in its moral daring. He had spoken often of time, that ancient enemy and silent teacher. We must use time as a tool, not as a couch, he said, as if knowing his own hours were numbered. In his brevity lay his immortality, in his unfinished work, his perfection. For history is rarely moved by those who complete their tasks, but by those who awaken others to continue them. And so, long after the rifles cooled and the motorcade fell silent, the echo of his challenge remained. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. That call was not political. It was metaphysical. It summoned every citizen to transcend self-interest and to serve the greater continuity of the human story. It was in essence the same impulse that had driven him to the stars, to peace, to justice. The belief that man is, by nature, a builder of futures. Today, when we look upon his portrait, the tilted head, the distant gaze, we do not see a politician frozen in time. We see a question still alive. What will we do with our own brief hour beneath the sun? For in the long narrative of civilization, Kennedy occupies that sacred intersection where vision meets mortality, where hope is sanctified by loss. He reminds us that progress is not a gift, but a discipline, a choice renewed with every generation. The historian's task is to trace the pattern of human striving from tribe to kingdom, from empire to republic, from ignorance to understanding. In Kennedy's arc, we find that same eternal pattern condensed into a single life, the transformation of privilege into purpose, of fragility into fortitude, of mortality into meaning. Thus, the flame at Arlington is not merely memorial, it is metaphor. It burns to remind the world that light, once kindled in conscience, cannot be destroyed by death. It may flicker, but it does not vanish. And so the chronicle closes John Fitzgerald Kennedy, soldier, scholar, and sovereign of vision, did not live to see the world he imagined, yet because of him, that world remains imaginable. In the quiet after the storm, as history turned another page, his words lingered in the air like prayer and prophecy combined. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. That, in the end, is the essence of the human story. The will to kindle light in darkness, to speak meaning into chaos, to stand, even briefly, as watchmen of the possible. And as the centuries unfold and generations look back upon that young man who spoke beneath the winter sun, they will find not merely a leader, but a lesson that the true revolution of humanity is the conquest of fear by faith, of doubt by duty, and of despair by courage. A standing ovation moment. So let the flame burn on, not in stone or steel, but in spirit. For as long as men and women believe that one voice can still awaken the conscience of a people, John Fitzgerald Kennedy lives